Welcome to the Black Duck Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Wilkins. I'm excited to have you join me as I speak with a fascinating collection of folks, all of whom have in common that they've made a way for themselves by finding an intersection between thoughtful consideration and the tactile work of getting their hands dirty. This is an examination of intention, capability, and craft. It's where philosophy meets the blue-collar work ethic and where I find real value. Hey folks, on this episode of the Black Duck Revival Podcast, I'm joined by California-based wildlife photographer and waterfowl biologist, Gary Kramer. Gary was at Black Duck Revival this season to teach a one-on-one waterfowl photography course with a visual artist who came up. He's originally based in Mississippi. And then we were joined by some other clients, and we rolled that into our regularly scheduled programming in the form of a weekend speckled-belly goose hunt. Gary was a pleasure to have in camp. He was a wealth of knowledge about waterfowl biology, scientifically based information for a change, not just old wives' tales and, the pontification of people that aren't seeing birds. That seems to be so much of what duck hunting and goose hunting is. He was also a trove of stories garnered from a lifetime, almost 50 years of traveling the world and photographing wildlife and working in the field of wildlife biology, mostly in California. And we had a conversation at the end of this weekend. It was just Gary and I left there at camp, and it was a conversation I so appreciated and so enjoyed, and I think you will too. So please soak it in, absorb, listen to this episode of the Black Duck Revival Podcast with Gary Kramer. Hey, welcome back to the podcast, folks. I am back up at Black Duck Revival as I have been and will be for the remainder of waterfowl season. I'm sitting at the old table in the old church pews, and this time I'm joined by Gary Kramer. Gary is a wildlife biologist. He's a renowned waterfowl and wildlife photographer. He's a world traveler, and he's been down here for day four. He taught a photography class to a private photography class on waterfowl photography. We've done some hunting. We've eaten a bunch of meals. We've hung out. We've talked. It's been fantastic. The rest of the clients have all kind of gone their separate ways, try to get back to their families, and so we've got an evening to ourselves here, and it's a perfect opportunity to do this podcast. Gary, welcome, and thank you very much.
All right, well, thanks a lot. I appreciate being here. We had so far a great time, as you said, did a little hunting, photography, and of course, you're well known for your fine food.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Gary. So, I've been struck by the fact that, we've essentially talked about the fact that you've got 45, 50 years in this industry. You had a full career as a wildlife biologist. You were well known as a wildlife photographer at that point, and then when you retired, you started doing this full time. You just released a book, and we're going to talk about that and hear some stories about some of these like crazy traveling expeditions you've gone on. But if we could, let's kind of start back. You're from California. You still live there now, but I know that you're a war veteran. You're in the Marines. Like we said, you've got a master's in wildlife biology. So, just how did it start, Gary? You were born, you were in California, then what happened?
Well, I was actually born and raised right near L.A. Airport, which is an odd place to end up being a biologist and refuge manager and so on. But I always had an interest in the outdoors. My dad didn't hunt or fish. My grandfather fished. So if you think about it, you live in L.A., the only wilderness is the ocean. There isn't any other. So my grandfather was a big ocean fisherman. So when I was a little kid, I started fishing with him in the ocean and kind of got that whole interest in the fishing culture. And then as soon as I could drive a car, I hooked up with a couple of buddies and said, hey, let's go out in the desert and shoot something. And then that quickly changed from just going out and shooting a jackrabbit to, I always found waterfowl for some reason among all the birds pretty intriguing to me. And if you start looking, even in Southern California, there are some public hunting areas that are operated by both the state and the feds that, were within, a 2 to 4 hour drive. So we get up at dark 30, drive to these public areas and started hunting ducks and kind of got into that whole thing and enjoyed it. Then, of course, I was of the age that Vietnam came along, and I didn't have a lot of choices, and I didn't want to get drafted, so I didn't join the Marines. I joined the Navy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah, so I spent a couple years in the Navy during the during the Vietnam situation, and got out and said, and I had done no college prior to going in the service, but now I got the GI Bill, right? Mm-hmm. Can pay for it. And I said, what do I want to do with my life? And I just gravitated towards that fishing, outdoor hunting kind of a thing. And I started to look at college catalogs right before I got out, and I discovered that there was actually a degree in a number of the colleges and universities in either wildlife biology or wildlife management, kind of the same thing pretty much. So what I ended up doing was getting out of the military, went to community college for a couple of years because I barely made it through high school.
I'm right there with you, man.
So then a couple years of that, then I transferred to Humboldt State in northwestern California. And I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in wildlife management from Humboldt State. And then I at that point, I had already been in the military, and I was a little bit older, and there was a bunch of vets that were there. And I wasn't done with school. I said, I need to get more knowledge. So I enrolled in the master's program and ended up picking a topic which I had been hunting in Baja California and Mexico before, and hunting for Pacific or black brant. And I did a little bit of research and found out that, guess what? There's been zero research done on brant in Mexico, not one single study. And at that point, I spoke a little bit of Spanish, not much, but I kind of took a leap of faith and said, I'm going to do something off the wall. Went to my professor and said, I want to go down to Mexico, live there for a couple of winters, study these birds. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah. So he said, hey, I'll support you all the way. So I ended up going down to San Quintin Bay, where I did a study for one full winter from the 1st of November to the 1st of April, and then a shorter period of time, the 2nd, and basically documented what the hunting harvest was there. That was unknown. What their food habits were, which was eelgrass, but, mapped the eelgrass beds there, looked at honey mortality, crippling loss, but the main part of it was an ecological study to where I was able to establish the flight time from Alaska to Baja California. And the way it worked out is that before I went down there, I was sitting home one day and got a call from my major professor. He said, hey, there's a refuge manager from Alaska here in my office, and he heard that you were going to go down there and do the study on brant, which is a small goose that migrates from Alaska to Mexico, where most of the population winters. So I went down there, and he said, well,
this, just interject, this is purely a Pacific flyaway bird, right?
No, they're found both on the Pacific and Atlantic flyway.
Okay.
But there are two different subspecies of brant. There's the black or Pacific brant, and there's the Atlantic or the light-bellied brant on the East Coast. Plus, there's a third one that goes to Europe called the dark-bellied or Russian brant. So there's 3 subspecies of brant.
Okay.
But the one I worked on was the black or Pacific.
Gotcha.
So this guy tells me that he has been studying these birds, and when they what happens to brant is that they nest in the North Slope, the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, and parts of Siberia. But the entire population goes to Eisenbeck Lagoon, which is a national wildlife refuge on the Alaska Peninsula. And the entire population stages there. At that time, let's just call it 120,000 birds. So the whole population is there at one time. They spend about 6 weeks or more there eating eelgrass, getting fat for the fall migration. And then when they leave, generally they leave en masse. So one day you got 100,000 brant. Next day, 95% of them fly up, head south. So it's this giant mass of birds all at once. And if you look back into the 70s, this was 76, 75, 76. That was the height of the Cold War, right? Mm-hmm. And there was an early warning dew station at Eisenbeck Lagoon, which is an Air Force radar station. And this refuge manager had been working with the Air Force, and they can track this mass of birds when they leave.
Just because it was so big and all
so
at
big,
once.
It's a big giant blip on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So he had this all worked out. He said, okay, you're going to be in Mexico. And this is the years before there was any radio telemetry. So there's no way to know. Like today, you put a radio on them, right? And then you can track it with a satellite.
Yeah.
And it's real time, and you can, there they go. But back in the 70s, that didn't exist. So we worked out a deal. He said, well, how can I contact when you're in Mexico? Well, okay, 1976, 75, the only communication I had was a telegram. There was no cell phones, no pay phones, no anything. And it was a telegraph office, a Western Union office at the pharmacy in town, little fishing village. So he said, when they leave, I will send you a telegram.
One more freeze frame. When we talk about telegram, there's probably people listening to this podcast that don't know what that is. That's like the Morse code, sending Morse code through the lines, right? And someone has to decipher it on the other side.
Well, I think it was, at that time, it might have been more sophisticated, but I got a printout, a ticker tape. Mm-hmm. A ticker tape from them. They handed it to me when the time came. So this is like, we're talking really old school.
Okay, so it's not like back in cowboy days where there's like a guy in the station.
No.
Yeah, it's being sent through like phone lines,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's being sent through phone lines, and then you get it. It isn't actually a Morse code thing, but you get a message.
Yeah.
And the message is sent through a phone line, but that was the only way. I couldn't pick up a phone, and the guy couldn't call me. Mm-hmm. There was no internet, whatever, no pay phones. It went to the pharmacy that happened to have. The phone company was there, and I got the notification. But it was Western Union, like a telegram. Mm-hmm. So anyways, what happens is that this generally happens, let's just say, around November 1st. So I go out I'm there at the end of October. I go out on the bay, which is San Quintin Bay, and I set up these observation stations where I could actually do a count of the birds on the bay. First day I go out, count, no brant, 0. Second day I go out, 0. Third day I go out, there's 8. Fourth day I go out, there's 8. Then I go, and every day I'm going into town to check my messages.
And so it's the same 8 birds that are just hanging there.
Same 8 birds, 0 birds, 8 birds for a few days. So that went on for 3 or 4 days. I go in and I get the info, and it says brant exodus of major proportions, 2,000 hours on this particular day. Be on the lookout. So I go back the next day, 8 birds. Then I go out the next day, and after what amounted to 60 hours has elapsed from the time I knew they left, mm-hmm. I went out at sunrise, 8,000 brant.
Wow.
So what we calculated is that to fly the 3,000 miles from Eisenbeck Lagoon to San Quintin Bay in 60 hours, and it could have been shorter because I can only go out at sunrise. They might have arrived at night. I don't know that. They would have had to fly 50 miles an hour of sustained speed without stopping. And that was like, first time that was like blew people away.
Yeah.
That has been substantiated with radio telemetry a whole bunch of times since. And it still stands today. So that was like that was the moment, in my career that was like.
You entered the lexicon.
Yeah, right.
Of waterfowl biology.
Yeah, and and I'm a grad student, and I'm down in Mexico doing my thing, and all this stuff happens, and that really made a big difference in my career all along, because then, as part of what eventually, as I got into the Fish and Wildlife Service, and that didn't hurt probably getting in, mm-hmm. was the fact that I actually had duties as assigned, which was to be a liaison with the Mexican government for migratory bird matters. So for my entire 26-year career, I did work with Mexico on and on and on, which was really cool for me.
And you became fluent in Spanish.
Well, I'm about fluent, but I can speak Spanish.
Yeah, you can get around.
Absolutely. Well, I was forced to. I went down there living for 5-6 months, it's like sink or swim.
Yeah, yeah. What's kind of amazing about that to me is that ultimately that was two people. Two people figure that out just by going out and watching. So like you're going out. Do you have like binoculars, a spotting scope? What?
Yeah. What I did is that I set up a situation to where I set 12 observation stations that were on high points around the bay because there's some bluffs around it. And then I would you can only count them at low tide too, because that's when they feed and that's when they don't move much. And that's when there's no hunting. So they're walking around eating eelgrass. And I divided the bay into 12 sections, and then I would literally count that sections. I'd get a tripod with a spotting scope, climb up on the top of my pickup truck, and that was my observation, looking into these 12 pie-shaped cuts of the bay, and then you add all them up, and that's how I got my counts. And I did it consistent for 6 months.
So you've done this, you've become bona fide, right?
Right.
And then you enter into like fish and wildlife management. For how long? You said more than 30?
26.
26. So how did that, so then you move into that, and we were just talking about this before we recorded, but you ended up managing 6 refuges?
Well, what happened is that initially when I got out of college, the Fish and Wildlife Service wasn't hiring. So I took a job with the Bureau of Land Management in Nevada for about a year. And I was a wildlife biologist with them, but that wasn't my interest. Was always waterfowl and ducks and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as I had a year in, which is what you have to do, then I started to apply for Fish and Wildlife Service. And it so happened that I got lucky in my timing is that a number of biologist jobs opened that were brand new in the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I applied for several, and the one I got was the wildlife biologist for Kern National Wildlife Refuge near Bakersfield, California. And, it was a place that I had actually hunted as a teenager. So I knew it well. And I got hired on. I worked there for 3.5 years as a wildlife biologist. But it was mostly duck work. I flew aerial surveys. We banded waterfowl. We're working with habitat. So it really was, that's kind of when I say the words of wildlife biologist, which was the actual job title, and the fact of waterfowl biologist kind of took over. I mean, that isn't officially what it is, but that's what I did. After 3.5 years there, and then I moved to San Luis National Wildlife Refuge, which is further up in California, further north. And there I was another wildlife biologist, but I worked primarily on private lands. There's a huge duck club area there called the Grasslands.
Okay.
And we had a conservation easement program to where we were actually paying money to the duck clubs to keep that habitat, not develop it in perpetuity. It had to stay in wetlands forever. You couldn't build a parking lot on it. Nobody else could buy it. Mm-hmm. So it was about half that kind of a job. And then what I would do is that my real job was taking those guys and convincing them to take part of that money and improve their habitat. So it was a real habitat-based job. So I went out to the duck clubs and talked to the guys and worked with them and improved the habitat so that the habitat was higher quality. And now they had a little bit of money to do that with.
And so then, and the benefit is that they improve habitat. They end up with more birds. They have better hunts. But you're also, like in the scope and the scheme of it, you're providing good habitat for a bunch of birds that aren't going to get hunted.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, and one of the things, a real interesting thing is, for instance, when I first got there, traditionally the last day of the hunting season, they would pull all the boards from the water control structures and drain the water off.
Oh, really?
Okay, that was tradition. Just think about it. You're done duck hunting?
Yeah, get rid of the water.
Get rid of the water. But the fact remains is that research has shown that waterfowl, in particular the females, need that wetland from the end of duck season through the spring, where they shift their diet. In the case they're eating rice, for instance, they shift to mostly invertebrates, high protein, to build energy reserves for breeding. So they need that habitat, frankly, worse February, March, April, or at least equal as they do in the rest of the year, to increase their breeding success. So that what I did, I go to these guys and say, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's why you do it. Here's how it's going to benefit you. And I was able to make some changes in the way they manage that habitat. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff. Plus, they grew a lot more food. and it provided a lot of months, another 90 days of habitat for those birds, which helps the population as a whole. So it worked out. I mean, it's beneficial for the birds, for the hunters, and for just general waterfowl management.
So you're moving through these biology jobs. You're staying, like, it's always staying focused on waterfowl.
Right.
When did the photography and the writing come into it?
Well, what happened is that after I left San Luis Refuge as the biologist there, I kind of made the leap of faith, and I became a refuge manager. Traditionally, the pathway to that is as an assistant manager first, and then you go to the manager. Well, I was fortunate in the fact that I made the leap and I didn't have to do the assistant manager thing. I went right to a management position.
These leaps of faith seem like they're a theme in your life.
Well, whatever. It happens. It keeps happening. It's just like the book I ended up with. That's the culmination of kind of all this. And it's just taking another chance, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, I became the manager of Salton Sea National Wildlife Refuge in extreme southeastern California in the desert. Again, primarily a waterfowl refuge, although there's a lot of other species there. I ran that operation, plus we also ran an operation in San Diego Bay, which was mostly endangered species, not waterfowl. And then we ran one in the desert, which was set up for an endangered lizard, actually. So I had a real varied job there. Did that for 5.5 years. And during the interim of that, have you ever heard of the joint venture concept, that they have a Mississippi joint venture, Central Valley, all around the country, where they take all these different groups of people interested in a geographic area and try to do good things for waterfowl?
I guess I haven't heard of that.
Yeah.
No.
There's one in the Mississippi Flyway. There's a number of them, but the Central Valley joint venture was one of the first. And I got asked to be the Fish and Wildlife Service, the joint venture coordinator. And it was a deal to where they said, we'd love you to do this. We'll give you a promotion.
Yeah.
But you got to move to Sacramento. And I said, if I do that, I'm out of the field, working out of an office. And I'd really like to play this out. Plus, I knew that Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge in Northern California, which is one of the larger complexes in the country, winter 2 million ducks and half to 3/4 million geese. I mean, it's a huge waterfowl operation. That it was going to come open, because I knew the manager was retiring. So I said, this joint venture job is flattering, but I'm going to pass. So the guy calls me back a week later and says, would you take it as a 90-day collateral duty assignment? So I said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll help you out. Well, I did it for 1.5 years. Year and 3 months as a collateral duty. But there was a lot of folks that we worked with, and I got a lot of exposure in Washington, D.C. for the Fish and Wildlife Service with Ducks Unlimited, California Waterfowl, Audubon, on and on and on. Sacramento Refuge came open. I applied for it, and probably because I had that other job, I got selected for Sacramento, which was really kind of my dream job, really.
Okay.
I ended up doing that for 10.5 years. Then I took an early out. But along the way, about Salton Sea time, I started to go, well, I've been on a lot of fishing and hunting trips. And I started to write a few articles. Actually, it was before that. And I would send it to outdoor magazines. And pretty soon, they started to publish a couple of them. I mean, it's like, if you really look at sending articles to magazines, you just send them blind, about 95% get, in the trash can back in those days. Got a couple published, and I go, well, this is a way that maybe I can augment. My hobbies were still fishing and hunting, right? Mm-hmm. But I'd see ducks every day. On the weekends, what do? I go shoot them. And to offset, the family income, offset my hobby with a little bit of extra income that doesn't take away from the family income, mm-hmm. right? And that just slowly increased. And then I found out that if I could sell a package that had the text and the photos, it was much more likely to sell than if I just send them words, because they want the package. It makes it easy on the editor, right? So I started taking photos and eventually bought better equipment. And by the time I got to Salton Sea was when I bought the first serious 500 millimeter lens, and then it just kind of took off. The writing part I still do plenty of. I've done a bunch of books. But the photography has really been kind of my passion. I would do that anyways. I just happen to be lucky and get paid for it. So that's how the photo thing came in. And then this early out showed up, which was you had to have 25 years of service in any age. And I had 26 years of service. So I said, I think I'm going to pull the plug and do this photo writing full time. And I got a retirement check 2 weeks later. So it wasn't a bad deal.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that's the history of it a little bit.
So I'm going to revisit something real quick, and then I want to talk about this book that, frankly, Gary, like, fucking gorgeous book, man. Like, gorgeous, substantial, heavy. It's like, I don't know if folks, I grew up going to libraries, and there's like books. I grew up, and it was still a situation where I felt like it was a status symbol that we had a set of encyclopedias at my house. And I remember like thumbing through those and looking, and like you're discovering, right?
Right.
And that's what this book is. But I want to step back before we get to that and hopefully explain some of how that book got put together. But like we've talked a couple times about, you keep taking these leaps of faith in your life, right? And they pan out. They've panned out big for you. Like what made you think that those things would work out? Because so many people are like crippled with being indecisive and not believing that they can make something big happen. And I've really been struck by a lot of the people I'm talking to. They all kind of have that quality in common. So like, why did you believe in yourself, I guess, just basically?
That's a real hard one, but I tell you what, there was a turning point. I would never say this is just a fact. Prior to going in the Navy, right? I mean, I was a pretty bad student in high school. I was more interested in cars and girls than anything else, right?
Yeah.
But I went in the Navy, and I went to a 12-week school, what they call an A school, to learn a trade, right? And I kind of, before that, I don't think I really believed in myself very much, but and they give you a test every Friday, right?
Okay.
And the first test came along, and I got the highest grade in the class. And I'm going, what's this about? In the second week, I got the highest grade in the class. And I go, and then in the military, they give you a lot of accolades when you do good. So it was like you get the pat on the back, you get your name, you get less duty or something, you get a pat on the back, and they encourage that. Well, by about the third week, guys are starting to come to me, probably for the first time in my life, saying, well, how'd you do that? So what the progression became is 12 weeks, I got the highest score and graduated first in my class. And probably that was the single turning point that I said to myself, if I try something hard enough, because at first, the first week, number one, was a mistake. I mean, it wasn't like I tried. Then I tried harder and harder and harder. And by the last day, I had the highest grade out of, 50 guys. And probably that was the turning point that I said to myself, if I try hard enough, like going to San Quintin, doing the first study ever done in Mexico on Brant. I mean, I just drove down there. I didn't know where I was going to live or anything. And I found a place to live and lived there but that really to me was the turning point. And then I kind of took that into my education and did well enough that when I went to grad school, it wasn't like, what are your grades like? They're cool. Sure, we'll take you. So I think I haven't thought about that in a long time, but I think that was really the turning point.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people have like found their own way and achieved success. If they did sit and think about it, they'd have some sort of like eureka moment where something changed, And I absolutely agree with you. Just the idea that if you work hard enough, I think I kind of feel that way. I feel like if I just work hard enough, it'll work out. And it'll be okay, and whatever little success I have in life, I think has come from that. But, all right, so this book, Waterfowl of the World, over 500 pages, over 1,000 photographs, over 40 countries that you visited in just a couple of years to take these pictures. Never been done before. It's never, you took pictures of every species of waterfowl on the planet. Yeah, and we've talked a lot about it. You gave a really rad presentation a couple evenings ago for the clients that came through for this last hunt. But if you don't mind, reiterate that story. How did it come to be? How did you make this happen? You've got to be one of the most well-traveled people I've ever met. So, yeah, how did that all go down, man?
Well, kind of the way it happened is that I had done a book before called Game Birds, 5 years ago. And it was the first book that had ever been done on all the game birds in North America. Pheasant, quail, grouse, that kind of stuff. 34 species, including 13 species introduced in Hawaii. And I photographed them all. And that was kind of something I set up for myself and said, as I look around, I haven't seen a book like that. And I figured it was something I wanted to give a shot. But it was in North America. It took me about 3 years. But during the course of that, it kind of dawned on me, I'm doing this about game birds, but my thing is waterfowl. So this thing gets into my head. Could I possibly, do waterfowl on a giant basis? And there actually had been a book in 1997 written by a guy named Frank Todd. And at the time, it did have a single book with every species of waterfowl in the book as far as text. And he wrote the whole thing. And it had photos, but he didn't take all the photos for one. And it was the quality of the late of the 90s. It was all slides. And you look at it now, I even look at my photos from the late 90s and go, how did I ever publish that? I mean, they're horrible compared to today's digital photography. And it had always been in the back of my mind. I'm always looking, for me, the hype is doing something. The thrill is doing something nobody's done. Started with San Quintin. No, that had never been done.
Yeah, I'm getting that. You're motivated by being this Neil Armstrong idea, like the first one to set foot on this idea.
Well, it's worked out that way. And then once I go, I can't let myself give up. So I did the Game Birds book, and it was very successful. So I looked at this book and said, can it be done? It's kind of what this Frank Todd did, but in a modern version, digital photography, and then the world has changed drastically in 25 years. And I think in his book there was 150 species. There's 25. They're not brand new, discovered, but there's been a whole lot of splitting of species of waterfowl. Canada geese is a great example.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Talk about that if you would.
Yeah, it's a great example. I mean, back in the day, there was a whole bunch of species of Canada geese that included the 3 little tiny ones, or 4 little tiny ones. And that was split out here a number of years ago as cackling geese. So the Richardson cackling goose that they have in the Texas Panhandle, the little guy, the Aleutian Canada geese in California, and the cacklers in Oregon, for instance, those guys are no longer Canada geese. They're cackling geese, and they are a full species by themselves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they now have a full chapter by themselves, whereas if I would have done this book 20 years ago, they'd be in one chapter, and that's happened to a whole bunch of ducks and geese. There's been this splitting, and the splitting has occurred from the advent of genetic analysis. You can look at the genes, and you find out that it's kind of like, at one time there's a full species called a Mexican duck. People thought they called it a Mexican mallard. It's not a Mexican mallard. It's a full species, Anis diazii, and it's a Mexican duck. So that was split out. So there's been a lot of that going on. Plus, in 25 years, the world has changed drastically, habitat-wise, administration-wise, pollution-wise, more endangered species, all that. And then there's some species like Canada geese and snow geese that have done the opposite. They've skyrocketed in their numbers from what they were 25 years ago.
Yeah, we've been looking at lots of snow geese.
Yeah, and white fronts. There's more white fronts, Cackling, Aleutian Canada geese, or what used to be Aleutian Canada geese, which are now Aleutian cackling geese. At one time, there were 800 birds, 800 pairs. There's 50, 60,000 now. And the limit's 10 a day, where they were closed before.
Man, I was in California a couple weeks ago. Those limits over there are enviable. And the number of different kinds of waterfowl. I live where mallards are king. I'm motivated by chasing specks and geese these days, but there's all sorts. There's tons of pintails and widgeons and different kinds of swans, and they're thick. You just drive across highways, and Like I called my buddy and was like emotional. I said, man, I've never seen this many ducks before. That was just an aside about ducks, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So anyways, it ended up that I decided to, go for this book because of all those reasons. I already had essentially all the photos of the North American ones. Now, I improved upon those over the course. The project really took me about 3.5 years to complete, but I had a bunch already. So I figured I got a good start on North America. Mm-hmm. I had been to South America quite a bit, Argentina in particular, hunting, some outstanding waterfowl hunting in Argentina. And I had also been to Africa and done some duck hunting. So I kind of knew about, I already had, and whenever I go on a hunting trip, typically I'll shoot in the morning in the gray. As soon as I get good light, I'm taking photos. And like we saw, we had a couple days with real bad weather.
Yeah.
I either hunted or we were doing our photo class. But then today, as an example, we had good weather. I never picked up a gun.
Yeah. Just took pictures. Sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I've done. So I just started down this road. There is a scientific publication called the International Ornithological Congress. And they're the ones that I used as my base for the 167 species. So I got a laundry list, right? Look at what I have and just start picking them off. I mean, I just started going, I went to, and luckily the internet allows you to do this research, sitting at home. Think about 30 years ago how you do it. You have to go to a library, like you say, and try to figure it out. It'd be impossible. So, for instance, I went to Chile. There was maybe 10 species down there, of which 8 I didn't have. And because of the internet, I could contact people down there that were mostly bird watching guides. A few of them were photographers, but I said, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Can you help me find this? So everywhere I went, I had a bird oftentimes I had never seen. Oftentimes I went to a place I had never been. Always meeting a guy I didn't know. And I never knew what the weather would be like. And then I had to pick the right season. So I kind of just started mapping that out as I went and pecking these things off. And I did 40 countries in 36 months. Sometimes 2 a month. I did 6 or 8 countries in Africa. I did Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Iceland, Azerbaijan, England, Scotland, all over Canada, the U.S., Mexico, Nicaragua, on and on. And I just kept picking them off. And as I would get those species taken care of, then I would concentrate on the next group. And I tried to do it in groups, as many as I could get. But there were sometimes I went to, like for instance, I went to the Philippines for 1 duck. Flew from California to the Philippines via South Korea. Spent 5 days over there to photograph 1 species of duck, flew home.
Because that's the only place you could find it.
It's the only place in the world they exist. I went to another place.
That's the Philippine duck, right?
The Philippine duck. There's another one that's called the Andaman teal. It is found in one small island chain in the Sea of Bengal, closer to Thailand than India, but it's owned by India. So to get there, I flew 8,000 miles, went to India first and photographed there for about 10 days. Then I went to a place called Chennai, India, 2.5-hour flight to these islands, and went there to photograph 1 duck. There's only 1,000 left in the world, supposedly. I mean, that's what they estimate. Had a guide lined up, got off the airplane, 85 degrees, 85% humidity. This town is like smoke and tore up and everything else, like many of the Indians' towns. I asked this guy, I said, hey, what are the chances of me getting a photo of this duck that I just came 8,000 miles to get? He said, don't worry, Saeed, we're going to show you the duck. We go around the corner. 20 minutes later, he points to a wetland on the edge of town, trash by the edge of the pond, and says, there they are. There were 400 of them. Half the world's population in a pond next to this town. And I sat there for 3 days and photographed them with impunity. It was like nuts. I thought that would be crazy hard, and it wasn't.
Well, I mean, it was hard to get there.
There's a long ways to go. And then there are other ones that were so hard that, I almost wasn't successful, but finally was. One of those was, it's a bird called the Salvatore's teal. found only in the mountains of New Guinea, Papua New Guinea. And when I looked on the internet, I found photos of this duck, but they were all taken either through a spotting scope, with a camera, or they were taken with a camera, but they were cropped so tight that it was just, I didn't see one professional level photo. So I go, well, that's rugged. There's no photos for me even to compare to, or even call the guy that took one. I found some people on Instagram. I'd find people and ask them if they'd help me, point me in the right direction. Well, that was impossible with this guy. Flew to Australia, photographed there for 10 days, flew to Port Moresby, capital of Papua New Guinea, then flew to a mining town up in the mountains where I had done some research and found out that that's where the bird watchers were seeing them. Flew up there. This place is the weather's so bad, it has 2 flights a day, 3 a week make it in the whole week, out of about 12 tries because the weather's so bad. Got lucky, flew up there. Long story short, there are riverine species found in the jungle, impenetrable jungle, down to the river's edge, that you have to hack your way through with a machete to get to the river. There's no trails. First day we're driving around. A buddy of mine went with me. We see a pair of them on the river. Get out of the car. Go, oh man, this is going to be easy. There they are. Get out of the car. 150 yards, they fly. They're only found in pairs and family groups. They never flock up. And everybody in New Guinea has a .22 or a shotgun, seems like. They either shoot the birds for their plumes because they use them in their headdresses, or if they can eat it, they eat it. So these birds are the wildest thing I have ever seen in my life. Long story short, 60 hours sitting in blinds, 4 minutes of photography of 2 birds, and that's what I got, but they're good photos.
When you would have like an arduous journey and like really, really had to earn it, like you said, 60 hours, that's after you traveled all the way across the world, 60 hours to get 4 minutes of them hanging around, you could take some pictures. I mean, what does it feel like? Is it relief or is it triumph?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's relief in the fact that I didn't have to go back.
Did you have to go back anywhere?
I did, yeah, a couple places. Romania was one of them for red-breasted geese. I went 3 times to get them, and I never got them. I did get them, but that was rugged. But in this case, it was relief that I didn't have to go back to Papua New Guinea and repeat that, both from a time standpoint and a money standpoint, because you realize that I'm paying for all this.
Yeah.
As far as the travel goes. That was out of my pocket. So I didn't want to do that. Plus, Papua New Guinea, in the world, the ruggedest places, in my estimation, just as far as the ability to travel, the fact that there's a lot of pollution, a lot of trash and all that, is India and Papua New Guinea. Those 2 places are rugged.
More than Madagascar? You talked about Madagascar.
Yeah, Madagascar's right up there. But those 3 are rugged places, as far as, the facilities and the road systems. And, India is a tough place. I photographed there near Delhi, right? Mm-hmm. In the morning, took 40. There's some urban wetlands right on the edge of town. A couple of them are even national parks. 45 minutes to get there in the morning, 3 hours to get back at night because of the traffic and the pollution and all the stuff. So so the Papua New Guinea was a bit of relief. I didn't have to go back, but triumph that I did get the photos. And it was like the big sigh of relief. And I looked at my camera about 100 times, and I, zoom in on it. Is that going to be sharp enough? Because I don't do any editing in the field. I wait till I get home because I can't tell till it's on the big screen.
Sure.
I don't want to do it on a laptop. So it's kind of both. You get both.
So that presentation you gave, it was about like an hour long, tons and tons of pictures, and you're talking about your journey through the book. The place I really keyed in on, and it's kind of references a conversation I had on a podcast I did with this podcast called The Wild Huntsman. David Lemire, really excellent podcast. But we were talking about, there's this idea around waterfowling that it's, it's for people that like to be catered to, right? And there are a lot of like high-end duck lodges and, really good food and just very comfortable surroundings and places where what I associate waterfowling with is like hunting public timber in Arkansas, which is like a slugfest. And so it seems like everything else is like you have butlers and whatnot. But I was talking to David Lemire and I was really asking, I said, I never hear about any kind of like backcountry, like mountain duck hunts, and maybe that doesn't happen because up at those high altitudes it freezes and you can't get to them. But you were talking about going to Peru and having to go like 15,000 feet up the top of these mountains, and there are these pools, these ponds up at the top of these mountains where there's quite a bit of waterfowl there. And you even said that you like found the one guy that in Peru that guides for waterfowl,
right, to
take you out there. And I've been thinking about it ever since because I was like, man, that looks like an earn-it duck hunt right there. I'd actually be interested, like that hunt or that photography session, especially. Like you live near Sacramento, you're going to fly out of Sacramento Airport,
right?
Like, what's it actually like to get there and get up on the top of that mountain and find those birds?
Well, originally, the guy that I located had a booth at SCI, Safari Club International.
Okay,
and he offered hunts, and I went there and hunted with him before the book. And at that time, you could import birds, and it was really a taxidermist, collection type of a hunt in the mountains. You could shoot some of these species, bring them back, and get them mounted. Now, since that time, it's become more difficult to import birds from Peru. And then the second half of that hunt was more of a traditional duck hunt in the lowlands. So when this book came around, because I didn't take pictures, I didn't take but a handful of pictures when I was up there because we were shooting a few birds. So when I went back, what you had to do is that I contacted him. He says, well, I kind of haven't been doing it as much because you can't import birds like you could before, but I got a guy that worked for me that would love to take you out. So I arranged, I paid the guy. So I flew from...
Real quick, when you say you can't import birds, you mean like you couldn't... Are they sending back like frozen birds that you get taxidermied?
Yes. That's what they were doing.
Is there a place could you get it taxidermied there and then ship that?
Maybe you could. I don't know about that. But at the time that I went, you could shoot a bird that was exotic to you, right?
Yeah.
And you could freeze it, and you could ship it back in your luggage. You had to go through the USDA, Department of Agriculture, to get those taxidermists that can handle that stuff because they're certified, right?
Okay.
And then you take it home and have your taxidermist mount it. I was actually collecting birds for UC Davis, but it's the same principle.
Yeah.
And then
oh wait, I didn't think about that. So you were, that's like Roosevelt, like when Roosevelt was going out and like shooting specimens of animals to then have taxidermy. That's like some old school naturalist stuff.
Yeah, well that's what part of this hunt was like that. And then there are more people, of course, in the waterfowling world these days that are into getting a taxidermy done on more than just the North American. Mm-hmm. Some guys' goal is to get all the North American. Then you have guys, people that are going beyond that, and they're bringing stuff from, foreign countries, and particularly Argentina is the same way. You used to be able to import birds for taxidermy. You can't now. And that's just kind of a trend that's occurred. I don't want to be bothered with it, but that's a whole different story. Yeah. So anyways, when I went back, his assistant, who I hadn't met before, I fly from Sacramento to Dallas to Lima, met the guy in Lima, and then it's like 4 hours, like straight up into the Andes. And luckily, there was a place to stay part way up. What was it? Oh, some hot springs. That's what it was. There were some hot springs about an hour drive from the top of the mountain. So every day we got done photographing, we come back and stay at this pretty decent hotel at the hot springs. But we would drive up, and that hot springs was at about 11,000 feet. So you're already high elevation there. And then you go up this gravel road, you keep on going, over a 15,000-foot pass. And then that photo that I showed in the presentation is these expansive grassland and wetland complexes. at the plateau of the high Andes, all of it between 12 and 14,000 feet. The pass was over 15, but then you drop down, called the Puna, P-U-N-A grasslands and wetlands. And there's a number of indigenous species, the Puna teal, the Andean goose, crested duck is another one, and then the Andean duck. So there's 4 or 5 species that really you only find in the high Andes. So my goal was to go there and photograph those guys, which we did over about a 6-day period. But that was just a pretty and then every day we'd go back down to the hotel where they had a restaurant, and every day we go back up. I get altitude sickness, so I got to take, pills. So altitude doesn't agree with me, but every day, there we go.
15,000 feet is incredibly high.
Yeah. So in the photography, once we got there, surprisingly enough, was I wouldn't call it easy, but it wasn't real difficult. I was able to, some of it get, just on the edge of a wetland and set up a little blind and get we'd see birds, and then we'd set up the blind in the dark, and they were small enough ponds that the birds would oftentimes come close. So I got everything I needed there. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it looked otherworldly in those pictures. It really did. What can you think of any place in North America that you could do some sort of like fill a backpack and like hump up in the mountains and have some gnarly little up in the air pond hunt somewhere?
God, I'm not really sure, because most of the species that we have really aren't adapted to that kind of habitat.
Yeah.
There's harlequin ducks that breed in the Rocky Mountains, in the Canadian Rockies, but then they migrate to the coast. So they're not there. I mean, really, there's not a lot of places like that. But I tell you, there is one in North America that's kind of like that.
Okay.
And that's Barrow, Alaska. And which is the furthest north town in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been there several times because there's some very, very unique species there. The one that I think is the most beautiful of all, which is the king eider. So basically, you fly to Anchorage or Fairbanks, and then you fly to Barrow, which has Alaska Airlines flights. There's only about 13 miles of road system there that goes out through the tundra. So what you do is that you have to get a permit with the native corporation to be out there. Then you can go anywhere you want, and a lot of that's just trudging around through the tundra. I mean, you just off 3 miles through the tundra. With your binocs, you see a pond, and looks like there's some ducks on it, and you trudge out there and go to the next. And so that's and you get king eider, which is a beautiful duck.
Wild, like their head, it's not normal duck shape. It's like a wave.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous duck. You get king eider, which are very widespread. They're circumpolar in distribution across Siberia. There's actually lots of them, but they stay always very far north. The spectacle eider, which is a super unique eider found only in parts of Siberia and Alaska. Until the 80s, they didn't even know where they wintered. It was like a big mystery. And finally, they found them in the middle of the Bering Sea on aerial surveys, and that's where they winter. But they breed up there at Barrow. Photographed those guys, which are really cool. Then the Steller's eider, which is the smallest of the eiders, it also breeds there. The biggest wintering populations are really in Norway, but they also winter in Kodiak Island in Alaska. Photographed those guys. Plus long-tailed ducks, which used to be old squaw, was the old name. Some specks, white-fronted geese, some brant nests there. So there's a nice variety of birds that you can, the real Arctic nesting species. The most common, and the pintail are fairly common too, up there.
Really?
Yeah, they don't need to fly that far, but there's some up there.
And are you finding them on ponds? Because like eiders are sea ducks, right?
Yeah, but during the breeding season, they come inland. They breed on freshwater.
Okay.
So what they do is you have these smaller, what they call tundra ponds, surrounded by all this expanse of tundra, and they have this wetland. And what they'll do is they'll pick those out, and that's where they'll feed heavily. And I'm going in June, right before they start nesting, and they feed heavily in preparation for nesting. Then the hen goes off and lays an egg. Then she joins the male again, goes off and lays another one until her clutch is complete. Then he splits and she sits on the eggs. And that's in freshwater. But they do all winter on salt.
Okay, so if you went up to Barrow to hunt them, you'd have to do it. It'd be a sea duck hunt.
Well, you wouldn't go to Barrow because the thing is that they're gone out of there by the time the hunting season's open. So you would have to go somewhere else. Barrow is so far north that, I mean, it's like a wasteland in the winter. Even the ocean freezes. I mean, the first time I went there, I got there, the ocean, as far as you could see, was frozen. 7 days later, it looked like Hawaii. There was no ice. But when I got there, there was only a short lee of maybe 50 yards between the shoreline and the ice. And then in a week, it all melted or drifted away. So in the dead of winter, when you could hunt, there's nothing there. So you have to come further south. First of all, spectacled eiders are endangered species. You can't hunt them. Steller's eiders are endangered, and you can't hunt them. You can hunt king eiders, and the most popular place in Alaska is St. Paul Island. That's where most people get their birds.
And that's folks like, are they sitting on like rock jetties, or are they out in boats, or what?
Boats and points and things like that. They do some hunting in boats where they'll drag decoys behind a Zodiac, and drift, and then some are on points. I actually shot a king eider in Kodiak Island, which there's not a lot there, but it was a number of years ago. But I did get a king that I mounted.
Do you have a lot of mounts, or do the pictures kind of serve that purpose?
I have some mounts. I don't have a lot. I don't have a single picture of a duck in my house that I took. Not one.
Well, you said you have like artists that use your pictures as references.
Right. I have a bunch of paintings by other people that were done based on my photos, but I don't have photos. I have paintings that I've got. Part of the deal is I get a free painting, right?
Sure.
So I got some nice paintings,
And have you had any of your pictures referenced for like duck stamps? We were talking about that the other day.
Robert Steiner has used some of my photos in some of his, in a number of his duck stamp prints, particularly for the state. He's used a number of mine. So he's a San Francisco well-known artist.
Okay. Is legacy anything that you think about?
Not. I don't know. I mean, like this book is kind of leaving something.
Well, I mean, you've got a lot of books. I mean, you've got at least 5, right?
I have 7.
7. So you've got 7 books where you've written and you've provided all the photography, right? Like a really holistic approach to this. So, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that you have some idea of what you want to leave behind, like what you want to contribute to this, this continuing narrative about waterfowl.
Yeah, and I think this book for me is really, it's kind of my opus. It really is the culmination of all this stuff that started back when, I found the public hunting area near L.A. and I said, hey, dude, let's go try to shoot a duck, a lot of years ago.
Yeah. And
that just progressed. And I look at my career. It's always been somehow associated with waterfowl, whether it be as a job and a profession. I mean, I banded lots of ducks. I flew aerial surveys for 13 years in California, counting them. Went up to Alaska during my tenure and banded brant on the breeding grounds, and did a lot of that cool stuff. And then the photography. So I think this book is really kind of what I'm leaving behind. And I made an effort to be able to provide it to conservation agencies free of charge, because I was able to raise some funds for the actual printing of the book, the actual design, printing, binding, and shipping. So the organizations, for instance, like Ducks Unlimited or Delta or California Waterfowl or whoever, can really get the book for free. Because, the coffee cup didn't cost anything. So here you go. Here's a coffee cup.
Sure.
But if you sell it, then it's a $90 book, $99 with shipping anywhere in the U.S., 540 pages, 1,299 photos. It's a monster thing. It weighs 8 pounds.
Yeah, you could hurt somebody with it if you wanted to.
There you go. Beat them down. But then that organization keeps $45 to do good things for ducks, right?
Yeah.
And then $45 comes back to me to offset my travel. And I spent lots of money on travel.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
But I knew that going in. That was kind of my plan. That was my business model, to be able to, at the end of the day, break even.
And you said that, and it as soon as you said it, it made total sense. But you said this is being used as a textbook in some places now too, right?
Yeah, they're considering it for a textbook at UC Davis. Is maybe a supplemental text because Dr. John Eady, which is really an outstanding professor of waterfowl ecology at UC Davis, he wrote the foreword to the book, and then he's looking at it for some of his classes, as well as a professor at Yale as well. So, and it's a peer-reviewed document. I had three waterfowl scientists review every word, every photo. One guy in England, two in the U.S., and so it qualifies as it really was designed as a coffee table book, a photo-driven coffee table book. But once you add all the text, it kind of is a dual purpose. It really is a photo-driven coffee table book, but yes, it has a lot of biological information.
Yeah, which is, for someone like me who's like fascinated with waterfowl, right? And I've got these species that I deal with, but I'm just fascinated with waterfowl in general. It's exactly what I want. I can look at lots of pictures of every single species in the entire planet. And then there's, a substantial amount of text. You're talking about what their eggs look like, where they breed. You talk about their courtship. I've learned a ton with you being here. It's the first time like when we were doing that photography, and we were hunting with a guy who's a dude I've hunted with for several years now. Very, very passionate about hunting speckled-bellied geese or white fronts. And he was asking you about, these old wives' tales about him that he'd heard his whole life. And you were saying, no, that, the bars and how big the white front on their head is, that's not an indication of age. It's just an indication that they're not a mature bird.
That they are mature.
That they are a mature bird. And what that starts like after year one, right?
Right.
And then we never even got into this. Is it like, we call them chickens if they're juveniles, they don't have any bars on their belly. When they get to year two and they have a white front and they have black bars, does that become exaggerated over time, or is it just that's what they've got and that's what it looks like forever?
Well, the black bars that they get can be even after that second year, but one with a real black belly doesn't mean it's real old, and that's what a lot of hunters think. They can have very few, but that's just a genetic trait of that bird. Its parents had dark bellies, so it does too.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as that. But a lot of hunters say, "Oh, that bird's got that real dark belly. That's a real old bird." That's not the case. So there's a lot of that, which, and in the book, what I tried to do is be very consistent throughout all species. So, and before I started, I kind of looked. Like, for instance, going to Australia, I go, well, man, I got to make sure I go there at the right time of year. Because, like here, if I came to look at beautiful mallards in July, there aren't any, right?
Yeah, probably a lot of people don't know that like a Drake mallard does not have that striking green iridescent head year-round. That's a courtship display.
Right. That comes on in the fall. They maintain it until the winter and spring. And then once they've bred, then they go off and molt. And they turn brown looking like a hen. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to go to Australia in the wrong month, because what if I go there and they're all brown ducks?
Yeah.
There's no color to them. Well, come to find out, which is in this book on every species, which took internet research beyond belief, is that guess what? Most of the ducks in Australia have the same plumage every day of the year. Because instead of breeding based on the fact that they fly north in the summer and then they leave that cold country where there's no food and they come down here for the winter, and it happens the same every year. If a mallard's going to breed, it's going to breed in, let's just, the month that particular hen, she's going to breed in June. It's going to be June every year, right?
Okay.
Australia is different in the fact that those birds have to be biologically ready to be able to breed based on environmental conditions. It rains 10 inches at some wetland 150 miles from where they're living. They all go there and breed. Doesn't matter what month of the year it is. It could be June, it could be July, it could be whatever. So they have to be biologically ready with this beautiful plumage so that they can get a mate and go do their thing.
Wow. Is that just birds that are endemic to Australia, or do you have birds migrating to Australia?
No, the birds in Australia stay. There's a little migration maybe to New Zealand or to New Guinea, but there's no giant, and there's migrations within the country, but there's a different program with those guys. Same thing in South America. The birds from the south fly north in the winter. It's opposite.
Yeah.
They nest in Tierra del Fuego, and then they fly up to central Argentina to spend the winter. So and it's the opposite of ours too, because it's the southern hemisphere. Mm-hmm. So the thing is that when I went to Australia, I go, well, I guess there are months that are more common for breeding, for sure. But typically, some of those species look the same every day of the year because they have to be biologically prepared for that breeding season if the conditions present themselves. So that's in the book. So now you know. I didn't know.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Is it that like all? So what's an example of a duck that we could be talking about with this?
Well, a freckled duck. You saw the picture of that with the freckly color on it. Freckled duck.
Yeah, they're really, really, really neat. So like a freckled duck. Is it that all of the freckled ducks in Australia jump onto that spot, or are you having some hens get bred in June, some hens get bred in October, throughout the year?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, you're right. It isn't like every one of them at this one spot goes to each of these kind of subpopulations around the country.
Yeah.
Take advantage of what conditions that somehow they sense. So I don't know that there's a lot of flying at 800 miles or 1,000 miles to breed, but there certainly is 150. Because Western Australia could be bone dry. And then another thing that happens in a place like that is that in the bone dry, like in Western Australia around Perth, mm-hmm. those populations of ducks, if it's real, even in the winter when they're not breeding, when they're not breeding as frequently, they'll go find good water. So they're much more nomadic. That's what they call a lot of those birds. They don't call them migratory; they call them nomadic.
Okay.
And that's what they do in Australia and New Zealand, for instance, and even a little bit in Africa as well.
Is there, like, I don't want to do these kind of basic questions like what's your favorite duck, but is there on this journey to complete this opus text, was there an experience that was like the most meaningful to you, or the one that just is going to hold a place in you for the rest of your life?
I think there really were two, and one of them I alluded to already, which was the Salvatore's teal in New Guinea. Mm-hmm. It was so difficult. I mean, once I got there, it was 10 times worse than I thought it would be. I figured I'd take the techniques I've used around the world and make them work, but, it took 60 hours, 6 days, and all that. So I've already described that, but that was just like, man, I finally got that picture, and now I have what I would hope to think is a professional level picture of that species. The other one is the Madagascar one, which we haven't really talked about much here, but we did, on the presentation, mm-hmm. and that's the rarest duck in the world. We really haven't talked about that, right?
No, we haven't.
Okay, so that one, just from the standpoint of like, wow, I got that thing. This is a species that's found only in one lake in Madagascar. It was thought extinct for 15 years. Nobody saw it. Some researchers, actually from the Peregrine Fund out of Boise, Idaho, were looking with some people biologists from Madagascar for an endangered raptor. They come to this lake up in the mountains, absolutely in the middle of nowhere, looking with their binos. They go, wow, there's some ducks on that lake. I wonder what they are. And they look at them, look at their bird book and go, those are those extinct ducks. They found 23 of them in the entire world on one lake. Mm. So they get all crazy. They come back. They tell everybody. They go back. They do more surveys. They find a few more, like 40. And then they determine that in the world, this duck that had been extirpated forever, well, for 15 years minimum, that they found a few. So they ended up then establishing a research station there, funded mostly by Europeans and Americans, to try to study these birds. They captured some and started a captive breeding program. But I went there before they had released any of those captive birds, and I wanted to go to the spot. 6 days of travel. I left at night, so I counted that day. 3 days of flying. Went to Europe, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia to Antananarivo, which is the capital of Madagascar. First day was 10 hours on pavement, which was mostly potholes. Next day was 10 hours on dirt. And the last 40 miles was 4 hours on the worst road. I showed you the photos.
Yeah, it does not look like a road.
It just tore up. Did that, got to this lake where these birds, at this point, there's probably about 70 birds on the lake. Hiked a half hour down this steep slope to this lake. The researchers had a yellow canoe, got in the yellow canoe with a local guide and a paddle. And in 15 minutes, I saw the most endangered duck on the planet, photographed them like crazy for the next 3 days. And I mean, just to get to that place, and then the photos I got, because not everybody's hauling a 600 millimeter lens to Madagascar, I got like pictures I'm really proud of the most endangered duck on the planet. So that was a high point for me.
I almost think I would know the answer to this question, but and I've kind of described to some people like that, you know, that when you're hunting, the kill can kind of be anticlimactic. Like you put all this effort into achieving it, and then you do, and it's weird. You know, I don't know what percentage of birds, when you're shooting birds with shotguns, you know, maybe 25% of them still look, you know, fairly pristine by the time you get your hands on them. I hate for birds to get all messed up before you get on them, because like I want to look at them, I want to touch them and pet them, right?
Yeah, all full of mud.
Yeah, just beat up. But with these pictures, you know, you're not pulling a trigger, but you're essentially hunting them, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, the thing is that I still think that the best wildlife photographers in the world are people that understand hunting, because they've kind of been through that process. And with the ducks, you know, you got to get close. I mean, I get some of these guides that would show me a duck in 150 yards, and I say, well, I should have stayed in bed, because that doesn't do me any good. I got to be inside 50, 20's better. So I have to use the techniques, getting in the dark, set of waders. I mean, I wore waders probably 200 days a year, you know, when I was doing this. I get in the water in the dark, back up in the cattails of the vegetation with my tripod, big lens, and stay there for 5 hours. And, you know, birds flying by, and I'd scout it ahead of time, or the guide would, and there's a bunch of birds there. So that's a hunting technique that you would use. You know, sometimes I had to sneak up on them, you know, belly crawl up on them and get close. So a lot of those techniques. And then the other thing, too, is that, you know, a lot of people, they say, well, you're not a real patient person, you know. I don't seem to be. But I tell you what, when I'm sitting in a blind, I'm as patient as it can possibly be, because what you wait for is the shot. I mean, I have tens of thousands of photos of snow geese and pintails, but I still am always looking for the shot. And what I was able to achieve with this book is that while I didn't get the shot on every species, I got a whole bunch of the shots.
So you've got this lifetime of experience. You've worked up to this thing. Again, you described it as your opus. And I said it to you, like when I first picked you up at the airport, like you're incredibly sharp, man. Like you doing this traveling, you'd been up since 2 or something in the morning. You'd been on 2 different airplanes, and you look like you just came out of the bathroom, just like sharp and crisp as hell. So you obviously aren't done. You're not going to go sit in a recliner and twiddle your thumbs. So you've created your opus. Are you going to try and do some other sort of opus? You've got to be thinking about what's next.
Well, yeah. I mean, the first and the foremost is that, you know, this book has only been available for about 6 weeks. You know, part of the problem was I should have had it sooner, but the whole supply chain thing has jammed me up. There's actually 2 editions of this. One is the standard edition, which is $99 plus shipping. I mean, including shipping. But I also did 250 limited edition, which has a leather cover, type of a cover, goes in a slipcase, signed and numbered, and they're $250. And surprisingly enough, I cannot believe how many of those I've sold. I mean, which is really, I mean, that really hopefully says something about what people, and they haven't seen it, they just ordered it.
Well, I mean, you to be fair, man, you created an archival text. You know, this is something that I mean, it's gonna. I'm looking at it right now. It's sitting on the coffee table up here at Black Duck, and it's gonna live there. And everybody who comes here and hangs out like we were yesterday and sitting and talking, they're gonna put their hands on that and they're gonna look through it and they're gonna read and they're gonna, they're gonna be. If they're looking through that, if they're here, they're interested in birds anywhere. They're gonna be impacted in some way by that. So yeah, you absolutely created something that's deserving of fanfare and people wanting to get their hands on it. And like we talked about, birders and duck hunters are obsessive people, so they're going to want this. And yeah, like you said, you've sold a ton of them already.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just blown away that it's been this successful already. Ducks Unlimited has been real instrumental. They ran a beautiful story in the November-December issue on the book, published 30 of the photos from the book. I had an interview recently with Delta, their magazine editor. They're going to do something. California Waterfowl did. We're doing this. You're being kind and doing this and, getting the word out a little bit. I think right now I'm concentrating on the marketing of this thing. And that was the PowerPoint I did was the first time you guys were the guinea pig. And I've already got some other invitations. So I think
it was great. Hey, man, that was great. Like, I was sitting there and look, I was tired because – when I'm doing these hunts, I'm sleeping like 3 hours a day, but just fascinating. And like the pictures are gorgeous. And we've been talking for days about this. Like I'm learning and learning and learning. And it just makes me want to ask more and more questions. But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to interject.
Yeah. So anyways, the point is that I'm trying to market this thing and yeah, I'm sure there'll be another project. It's just at this point, I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be. But I tell you what I'm leaning towards.
Yeah, I'd love to know.
I did a book on game birds. I mean, let's face it, waterfowl's my thing, like you. But the game birds were there, and it was a bit of a precursor to a larger document. The thing that, and I'm always looking for something that hadn't been done, right?
Sure.
What really hasn't been done, and I photograph, big game, deer, elk, moose, not like I do birds. Birds are my thing. But a big, giant elk comes along, I'm having a good time photographing it. There's not been a book of all the big game animals in North America done in 30-plus years. So I'm thinking on that a little bit. It isn't my exact lane in photography, but wildlife is wildlife, and a good picture is a good picture. So that's something that I'm giving some thought. I'd have to go to some folks to see if I could get some help, like Safari Club International, Rocky Mountain Elk, Mule Deer Foundation, Whitetails Unlimited, things like that. But that's something I'm thinking. I mean, I'll never retire because I'd be a crazy person. I'm just going to do this till I can't do it.
Yeah.
And you will too.
Yeah, man, probably so. I've talked a little bit about why I'm in other forums about why I'm so fascinated with waterfowl. And part of it is like the ephemeral nature of it. You're constantly looking, they're here, then they're not, or like on a micro and a macro level. So like you're watching these migrations, but then you're also saying, like you probably saw me when I was driving this van around, I'm constantly looking, every little patch of water, I'm looking at what's in that.
See what's there.
Yeah.
Hey, they're not there today.
Yeah. What is it about waterfowl for you? Like you've dedicated, decades to this.
It's the intrigue of. A good example is when I worked for the Bureau of Land Management, only for a year. You're dealing with things where elk, mule deer, whatever, and habitats like sagebrush and forests that take a long time to change or do anything with. But as you say, the ephemeral nature of waterfowl, the magic of they leave and they go to this. Now, I've been to them all now, but at some point in my life, it was like they went to this magic place.
Yeah, it's still like that for me, yeah.
Yeah, and I've been there now and photographed, and then they come back every year. And from a biological standpoint, the thing that drew me to them as a wildlife biologist was that I can manipulate that marsh, and I can make a change in 1 year. I can do something good in that marsh with water control, or with disking out a bunch of thick cattails where they're not using it, or something. I can do something there's immediate gratification. So I think for me, it's a combination of that mystery of them going and coming, the big numbers. You can see a bunch of elk, but you don't see 40,000.
Yeah.
And at Sacramento Refuge, where I managed for 10 years, there's one wetland unit there that's about 50 acres, and under the right conditions, I can show you 40,000 pintails on 50 acres. There isn't a space on the levee where there isn't a duck, and the water's full of them, and that kind of thing, and they magically appear. They weren't there in July, and come November, there's 40,000. So I think it's that dynamics of the thing, plus the fact that as a biologist, I could do things. I can put a band on them.
Mm-hmm.
I can let them go and find out what the band return is going to come back. If I band it, my name's on it as a bander. I can go, wow, that dude found that bird. I banded it in Alaska. It got shot in Mexico. And then so I think it's the intrigue of all that plus I like to hunt them. I like the marsh. I like to be in the fields where they are. And as a hunting, I hunted all kind of things through my life, but I always hunted those the most. That's the number one thing. And there's a lot of waterfowl hunters that are obsessed with it like you are and that I am. I think a larger percentage of the hunting public than it is with most other species. You find pheasants forever, but the numbers of people that are into that or quail forever is nothing like the waterfowl group.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think even with all the biologic and scientific base that you have, like, it's because it's magic. Right. There's that little sprinkle of magic that's good to hold on to, just as people. Like, it's good to get giddy about stuff still. I hope I never lose that. Well, Gary, we've been talking for a long time. Why don't you tell people how they can find you, how they can follow you, and I think most importantly right now, how they can get a copy of that book?
All right. Well, the first place I announced it was on Instagram, because I've been on Instagram really for about 3 years, and part of it, frankly, was in preparation for this book. I wanted to get some followers to know that so I posted a whole bunch of things from around the world and kind of got this group of people going, wow, I never saw that duck before. Where's that thing, from? And then I'd always put a little narrative with it. So it's Gary _Kramer _photography. You can put my name, it'll come up. That's my Instagram page. I have no other social media but that, but I am pretty active with that.
Yeah.
And then the other place where you can get the book is that I have a website, which is Gary Kramer, GaryKramer.net. And then you can go to books on that website, and you can then order using PayPal, which is real simple. You just push a button and order it. Mm-hmm. So that's the where to get it. It's available on Amazon, or it will be, but I get hosed on Amazon because they take everything. Mm-hmm. So, but it will be available. I've had a number of inquiries from Europe and overseas, Australia, and so on. And the shipping's so expensive, I tell them to buy it from Amazon. But buying it direct from me, they're all signed, so you get a signed copy. And that's really the best place. Eventually, they'll be sold, really, I think, in major bookstores and so on. That is a slower process because of this supply chain thing. Plus, I had most of them delivered to my house. I got like 10 pallets in my garage, because I wanted to be able to be the distributor and sign them and so on. But they are available from other sources. But GaryKramer.net is the website where you can order them, both the standard edition and the limited. And that's where people can get them. And, people call me, and I've had some really nice comments on it. Perfect strangers saying they enjoy. In fact, because of Christmas, I just had a guy the other day that said, I got your book, can you send me 10 more?
Because he loved it so much, he just wanted to give it out to people he cares about. Yeah.
Gifts. So
that's awesome, man. Well, Gary, I've enjoyed it so much. Thanks for the conversation. We're going to cook so much food this weekend, and everyone's gone now, so we're just going to eat some leftovers, and then I think we're both going to get some well-deserved rest.
There you
and then
go.
You're back to California tomorrow. But, Gary, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us, guys.
Hey,
Talk
my
to you
pleasure.
next time.
Had a good time.
Appreciate it, bud.
All right.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Black Duck Revival podcast. If you'd like to keep up with me and all things Black Duck Revival, please do so by going to the website. It's just blackduckrevival.com, or on social media at Black Duck Revival. We will be announcing the 2022-2023 hunt school dates here in the early spring, so look for those in March. There's going to be a limited number of classes this year as Black Duck Revival changes and evolves, and as my travel schedule becomes a bit more robust. I really want to make sure that I'm offering quality hunts and really special experiences, and I think the best way to do that is just to not do too many of them and be able to put all my effort and intention behind them. So if you're interested in those classes, keep your eyes peeled. Like I said, early spring, probably March sometime, and when they come out, go ahead and sign up for them because I do anticipate them filling up. Also, that same time period, I'll be announcing the dates and availability for something that's near and dear to my heart, these personally guided catfish excursions here in the backwaters and the bayous and the rivers of East Arkansas. So early spring, March, start looking around on social media and the website. If you want to know about those dates before they're released to everybody, you can follow the prompts on the website and sign up for the email list. As always, this podcast is produced by me, Jonathan Wilkins, and Brian Sachs. Thanks so much for listening. I'm having a ball doing this podcast, and I'm so appreciative of some of the nice things and positive messages that people have been sending my way. If you want to help the podcast out, please don't hesitate to subscribe, rate 5 stars, even write a review. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.